this in their life. I believe all three of our speakers today have been through this in their life, and they've now subsequently, as so many times life deals us lemons, we make lemonade, and they're living a life now that helps others be better, in their own managing of their caregiving, and most importantly, I think, have companies understand what they can do to be more successful. So the program today includes our friend Debbie Howard, who's been a great member and speaker over time. I'd say one of our most amazing speakers, because invariably we always get a script from Debbie, whether it's about caregiving like it is today, or it's about the Japan market, or market research that she does with the Carter Group. She's just an extraordinary and intelligent woman who's one of the most prepared people I've ever seen. So Debbie, thank you for being here today. I know the topic of the conversation is corporate caring manager, which is a trademark. So I'd like to understand more about why that's trademarked. And specifically, the topic is supporting, engaging, and retaining caregiving employees. I can't imagine a more timely topic given COVID and how more people are caregiving, more people are working from home, more people are challenged in these ways. And then on the flip side of it, you've got employers who are saying, hey, I can't hire people, I can't retain people. And we've got the big resignation coming, I think, in September. And so we really appreciate all three of you speaking today on such an important topic. Debbie, I think you're going to kick things off. And so really appreciate everything that you do, and really looking forward to learning more today.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. We thought we'd start by sharing our own personal caregiving stories, because each of us have those. And we think it's really important to share those stories, and they are what has inspired us actually to do this work. I think some people have heard my story before, but I'll just retell it. I had been living for 24 years, living and working in Tokyo. So coming back and forth, visiting family and friends, once a year, maybe once every year and a half. And one day I got the call. And the call was that from my mom, and my mom had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And it was a real shock to our family, needless to say. As an entrepreneur, I was very front and center in my business. So that was a devastating blow to suddenly have caregiving responsibilities as well. But of course, I stepped it up. I started going back home every 2 months instead of every 12 or 14 months. And then my sisters, I'm lucky enough to have 2 younger sisters, we all spotted each other over the first year of my mom's chemotherapy and everything. But then near the last 6 months, we knew she could not live on her own. She really needed daily support. And I was the only one left with any wherewithal, because my sisters both worked for companies, and their FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, was all expired. After 1 year of 3 people spotting each other, we did not even have 24/7 caregiving needs. So it's a really dramatic example of how fast that extra time gets used up. And I went home from Tokyo. I had a great team in Tokyo managing the daily needs. And I lived with my mom and took care of her until she passed away. And we had hospice, and I moved from the marketing and, selling Doritos in Japan world to, wow, oxygen tanks, managing, home health care, hospice, the whole thing. And it was pretty traumatic. And I think what happened for me is that I was inspired as a researcher to look into the landscape of caregiving. And I ended up writing a book, and then doing workshops, and fortunately met John and Tanya. And now we're moving into this world of supporting corporations with a lot of the programs we've been working on for years. And we're not stopping. We are going forward with helping corporations to solve this problem. I'd like to turn it over to John now.
My mother lived till 93, and I helped her around her house. She had multiple comorbidities, which I think is very common. She lived alone in an apartment in New York City. And since I was working in New York at the time, I would go over to her house and either help her with some of her activities, or I would help her do the things that she couldn't do, such as fix all the damage her rabbit, which she let run loose in her house, do. So it was pretty amazing experience. It was eye-opening. And, you know, I was working in a major ad agency in the pharmaceutical field, so I was also doing the medical. But I also noticed that my mother was, you know, fading, and she actually took a taxi to the Veterans Hospital, and I took care of her up until the very end. And I said, you know what? There's a real need for caregivers to be understood, and that's why I actually went back to school at an age in my 50s, and then got my degree in gerontology, which I thought was essential to really put together the right kind of program for caregivers and seniors. So I'd like to turn it over to Tanya.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
We can.
Good. Just wanted to double check. So I grew up in the UK watching my parents taking care of each of my aging grandparents with a lot of love, respect, and dignity. And that has really colored the way I see the world. In 1994, I was married. I gave birth to my first child. I was living in New York. And it was then that I entered the world of the working caregiver mummy. And that mother work juggling act was challenging, as working mums at that time were still expected to leave their mummy hat at home. In 1995, though, I got very lucky. I started working at Y&R New York and was blessed to have the most compassionate and understanding female boss. And she permitted me to work from home every week because she trusted my work ethic. So that was remote already in 1995, which was really upping the ante in the employee experience department for me. But it really, the more I think about it now, the more I realize she was very much ahead of her time. So after a career in qualitative market research, and I still do that, I also returned to school in my 50s to do a master's in gerontology. And that was certainly a decision triggered by my vivid recollection of my parents' beautiful treatment of my elderly grandparents, all four of them. So what's the story now? Well, in addition to running a business, I am now a long-distance caregiver to my elderly London-based parents. I wish I was not long-distance, but in spite of numerous efforts to persuade them to move abroad to be closer to me or my siblings, they continue to refuse to do so. London's where they spent their lives. And as you can imagine, our COVID world is the worst possible scenario if you want to do caregiving really efficiently and from the heart, because we're all separated by thousands of miles, which makes it absolutely impossible to tend to them as well as we would like. So for the last year and a half, the last time I saw them was January 19th, 2020, we've all had to be extremely resourceful and creative and rely on the kindness of family members and neighbors as well, which is really less than optimal, especially given the fact that we have this heritage of really hands-on caregiving. So interestingly, virtual storytelling has become one of the pieces in my caregiving relationship, especially with my father. He's always been a raconteur. He always tells stories about the past. And this has actually, over COVID, been a more regular event via Zoom. And it's led to the development of my deep love and appreciation of the power of storytelling more than ever. So in addition to caregiving long distance and trying to make sure everything's in order, I've also started to apply my researcher gerontologist caregiver interviewing and writing skills to interviewing older adults. I actually did start that prior to COVID, but it's kind of ticked up during because I think it's a meaningful way to learn about people. And it's educative, immersive, and restorative for everyone involved, especially at a difficult time and long distance. So that's a little bit about my background, and very different from John and Debbie's, but we're all doing it the best we can. So I'll turn it back over to Doug now.
Thank you, Tanya. Actually, I see some similarities, certainly with Debbie, with the cross-border challenges that add a layer of complexity to what both of you have been through. And I'm wondering, you mentioned about your grandparents, and something that seemed to inspire you was the way they treated their parents. I'm wondering how, I know this wasn't really necessarily in the script, but I'm curious to know whether Debbie and John, you've had similar, did you go through something similar where your parents treated your grandparents in similar ways? And is that part of how you acquired these, the passion around this?
Thanks for asking, Doug. Yes, we were always really close in our family. And so I saw close up and personal how my grandparents aged, even my great-grandparents. I'm the eldest of all the grandkids, so I got to see the most, which is really, really a fortunate thing for me. I knew two of my great-grandparents and all of my grandparents, and that's quite unusual in these days, I think. But yeah, I did see how our families work together. And it was a high impact. In fact, in college, one of my term papers was a video about an aging center in Columbia, South Carolina, and how we can have more daily activities for aging population. So even when I was 20 years old, I was like super interested in this area. When I look back, it's a really interesting thing. When my grandma got she fell and broke her hip at 87, and I actually almost moved back to Tokyo and started a home for her and a couple of other women. I thought maybe I could make a small home environment. It became untenable for a number of reasons, but yeah, I've had this passion for a long time. Thank you.
John, have you had a similar background as well?
No, actually I didn't.
Interesting.
Both my grandparents had passed on. My mother had me late in life, so I didn't get to witness it personally. Where I really saw the caring experience was my 20 years in, launching pharmaceuticals and devices, and all the focus groups and all the discussions around it. That's where I really got inspired. So that's what happened to me.
Okay, fascinating. I know kind of the next phase of this program is, John, you're going to share some statistics around some of your favorite statistics, I think, so that we can kind of get our head around what these issues are.
Thank you, Doug. Let me just quickly share my screen so everyone can see the presentation and get some visuals.
Sure.
And
that we can see it.
Now we're good. Hopefully that worked. So there's an estimated 53 million adults in the United States that are working caregivers, and they're provided, unpaid leave. They are taking care of people. There's certainly differences between Latin and Asian families of how it works in the family system. But before the pandemic, the challenges of caring for a loved one was ubiquitous. Unless you work in a really small company, 3 out of 10 employees are working caregivers. And if you throw in the working moms and dads, it can get up to 50%. So they've been through a lot of anxiety, and they will go through a lot of anxiety because the average amount of time that they'll spend caregiving is actually more than 4 years. And that's for each person they're going to be caring for. So some people are, caring for someone who, multiple people at a time. Some people are taking care of people sequential, and that is an experience that I'm having now with my wife's parents. So it really is critical that, and my wife and I both work, so getting a real sense of what's going on there. So it really is very expensive to corporations, and corporations specifically, and this is not the cost to caregivers, the cost to caregivers is also a huge number. In 2020 was 63 billion, but it really is expected to jump to over 147 billion. And the reason why I say over 147, the 147 billion was a projection pre-COVID. So I'm just not going to change the number, but I'm going to say it's probably going to be a lot more. So it's really interesting when you look at the companies themselves. And Harvard Business School put out actually a booklet on the caring company. And it's a fabulous book, and I certainly recommend it. And one of the questions they asked, and which inspired both Tanya and I, Doug, was this. They asked managers, this is an assessment of, does caregiving affect employees' performance? And managers said yes to that. About 24% of them said yes. But when you ask the employee base, the number jumps dramatically to 80%. So clearly there's some kind of disconnect there between the managers and the employees. And we think we have some really good solutions and insights into that. So Doug, you mentioned the Great Resignation, and I think it's actually already started before September, but some people are probably taking their personal time off and using it and going on vacation in August and all those kinds of things. But the Great Resignation is going to cost employees a fortune. If they're replacing hourly employees, the cost to replace that person, and this includes training and recruitment and all those kinds of things, ranges from $2,000 to $4,000. You lose a lot of employees, that really adds up. I mean, if you're an Amazon and you have lots of hourly employees, that's a massive number. But when you take a look at salaried employees, the number is even greater. It's 2 to 4 times their annual salary. And the reason why that number is so high, it is not just the recruitment and the training, but it's also the loss of the intellectual capital that those employees bring into the business. So it's really, it's critical that they try to retain employees and more effectively recruit employees to keep these numbers down and these costs. And if you invest in an ounce of prevention, you're going to get a pound of cure. So that's really what's going on in the marketplace with the Great Resignation. And now I turn it back over.
Really fascinating. And, those are big numbers, big costs associated, and especially given kind of the market dynamics right now. So thank you for sharing that. Debbie, you are a woman of the world, and we know that this is not just a US problem, is it?
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, we know the prolonged pandemic has really pushed many employees to the brink. And we're even hearing from global studies that employee well-being is being named the #1 executive priority for 2021 in a recent survey that just came out a couple of weeks ago. And Josh Bersin, who's an HR guru in that survey, says that well-being has moved from the benefits department to the boardroom. And I know that, having lived as long as I did in Japan, I really saw that aging society right up close. And just to give you a little perspective, Doug, this is happening in every developed country in the world. I think right now Japan has the most aged society at 30% of the population being 65 or more. And that's compared to 20% of the population being 65 or more here in the States. So that's a huge, huge difference numbers wise. Italy is fast on Japan's heels, even more aged than America. I think America is probably third. And then of course, Australia, New Zealand, UK are coming right up alongside America. And Asia is also catching up. We think of Asia as having a very young population, but they are actually aging more rapidly than what took us decades to occur. So it's a definite global problem. We will have 1 billion people, or 10% of our population globally, aged 65 or more, like in 2030. So it is here. What we've known was coming is here, and the COVID situation has shown us how unprepared we really are to deal with aging problems and challenges in our society. It's shown us how strapped the healthcare systems are around the world. And it's shown us how high impact that is in companies with 30% or more of your workforce actually giving care to their aging loved ones. Things differ a little bit depending on culture. So you'll see some very interesting differences between different cultures and the way they deal with aging and death. We're not going to get into that today so much, but there's a lot of common ground there that can be solved before we get into culture even. And lots of the problems are very much across the board and universal. Thank you.
Wow. And this is all pre-COVID. So I'm wondering then, maybe Tanya, you could address this, is how has COVID either highlighted some of these issues and maybe even made some things worse?
Yes, I would definitely be the go-to for that one, given my own personal circumstances. But even before, forget about me for a minute, just thinking about what's happened in the US, so many family caregivers have had to pivot, make the decision to pull a family member from a care facility to bring them home, because as we know at the beginning, there were large numbers, not all, I guess, correctly assessed, but a lot of deaths occurring there. And that really motivated people to pull their loved ones out because they were frightened for them. So that's definitely, the whole caregiving issue has become more compounded, more front and center, more unavoidable, like, it's like in everybody's face. So that's the general people, I would say. And then there are individuals like me, and I'm certainly not the only expat here, whose parents are living abroad, elderly parents living abroad. And as I mentioned earlier, I have not seen them for a year and a half. I was actually considering going there the last couple of weeks, and I have a friend who is involved with contact tracing at the highest levels, and she told me last week, absolutely do not leave the country. The Delta thing is out of control. So, not just me, but everybody else out there, we have a larger number of caregivers who are more hands-on because their loved ones are closer to home. We have multiple situations in which the caregivers themselves have a larger amount of fear, anxiety, and depression, as well as more responsibilities, which of course compounds the level of fear, anxiety, and depression. And, I think Debbie mentioned before that wellbeing has moved from the benefits department to the boardroom. Well, if it was, in somebody's head and heart, I think we can, do head and heart for the power of 1,000 now, which, makes for some sleepless nights.
All of these are really big issues on a personal level. I'm wondering if we take a step back, either from a company perspective or just kind of handling the issue, what are some of the bigger issues that we should be thinking about here?
Yes. So mental health issues and concerns, I think, are front and center. They were before the pandemic's arrival, but they certainly continue to be top of mind for many employees and employers since COVID's arrival. I think in the first phase, spring, summer 2020, there was some research conducted, and it showed that the frequency of providing personal care to parents increased in the US, actually did abroad also, in brackets, I'm telling you. But what was very, very evident was that caregivers were openly reporting significant levels of great sadness, depression, anxiety, and perhaps very, very understandably, those working outside the home really, experienced increased caregiver anxiety and depression. It also became harder to obtain adequate care for loved ones because, of course, nobody wanted to let anyone into their home. Were they transmitting COVID? And, we saw multiple pieces of coverage on the media about, working moms dealing with their kids, but, we did not see necessarily as much of, caregivers taking care of older adults, either just older adults, just in inverted commas, and or, the younger generation. So we had this intergenerational, sandwich generation caregiving stuff. And then grappling with the whole new COVID world impacted employees very, very greatly. So I think, and I'm not really a number person, but I recall seeing that at the start of 2021, the top ranking issue for caregivers was job-related anxiety. I think that was at 31%. followed by depression at 15%. And don't ask me the stats, but there were also people who talked about headaches and loneliness, increased alcohol and drug usage. Suicidal thoughts were also cited, a lovely smorgasbord of awful stuff. And obviously studies indicated that those factors affected work productivity. How can they not? So, the implication is, very obvious. Hiring managers need to work even more closely with their teams to ensure that their employees have the tools to help prevent these issues and have the skills to help treat them if they're actually going through this. In addition, we have this diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, or multiple strategies are now needed in the workplace. And I'm just going to abbreviate diversity, equity, and inclusion to DEI because it's faster. And I think a recent Monster survey actually identified the fact that employees had certain impressions of what these DEI initiatives should look like. And they really recognized the need for employee training, as well as the creation of a very diverse workforce and inclusive environment. And, really, really doing that as opposed to just saying it. So 2 of the top priorities were literally having people from diverse backgrounds in leadership positions, because that's, they get where others are coming from. And the other really interesting thing was encouraging employee resource groups, which I think we'll talk about probably later, and I know that I will. So, one of the other disparities, and I know John talked earlier about, the perception among employees versus employers, so I'll throw another one out. The majority of US employers, I think there was 56%, said that they were updating their recruitment strategies to actually attract more diverse talent. But 30% of these employers revealed that they don't have a DEI strategy in place. So that's kind of, a complete misfit. And the other interesting thing that I'll throw in there, because we are talking about caregiving, is that those who do have an active DEI strategy seem to focus primarily on race and gender and ethnicity, much less on age and disability and veteran status. And obviously, if we're talking about working caregivers who are charged with dealing with older adult situations, it suggests that their needs are not being adequately catered to. So I will throw it over to you there, but I could go on for a while, but there's a lot of stuff going on that needs fixing.
Some sobering facts here. Thank you for sharing that, Tanya. Debbie, how are companies approaching this then? There's a lot of trouble here that needs to be addressed. What's the actual now next steps?
Well, what we're seeing is much greater discussion of the employee experience. Some people say workplace experience or even workforce experience, because workforce would include your contract workers and employee usually includes salaried workers. But whatever you call it, many companies are scrambling these days to look at their workplace and employee experience, and including all of the issues that Tanya mentioned with mental well-being, emotional and health and well-being, DEI, very important aspect. And I think what we are saying is that, yes, your aging workforce is also part of DEI. We are seeing our aging workforce being a little ignored when it comes to how the companies are starting to get involved in things. But that's just a little bit of a lag time, because it's definitely on their list. We're seeing a lot of media coverage. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that news, Doug. There's just so much out there these days. Every day it seems like there's some new report or new statistics. The care economy in the US has been valued by Melinda Gates' Pivotal Ventures Group at $648 billion as of 2 weeks ago. That really got a lot of attention. And these topics are front and center. So companies are definitely taking a look at it. Most of the early attention is going to support caregivers of young children at home. Much like in the US, the first government help that came was for caregivers of younger care receivers. And, the the support for caregivers of older caregivers was on the docket, but it didn't get included. So now, of course, many organizations, including AARP, are on the warpath with letters asking people to write letters to their congressmen to make sure we get a tax credit for elder care as well. I don't like using the word elder care. You'll usually hear me talking about aging care, or I'll use the longer caregivers of aging adults. Because, you know, as you get older, you don't like to be called elder, actually. But companies are really wakening up, I would say. And one of the biggest trends we're seeing in HR is the look and the view at lifespan culture. So not only celebrating the fun things that happen early in life, like birth of a new child or getting married, raising your children, not only celebrating those things, but also celebrating the things that naturally happen at the ends of our lives, such as caring for aging parents. And I'd just like to close off by saying that it's really interesting to know that this is not just an aging problem. Amongst those 53 million caregivers in the US that John mentioned to you, 10 million of them are millennial aged. So what's happened with the pronounced aging in our society is that there's just too much work for our healthcare system to handle. And the responsibilities are getting pushed down to younger age groups. We even have 1 million so-called youth caregivers in the States who are 12 to 15 years old, but are being recruited into work by their families at home because there's just not enough help. So I would say, in answer to your question, Doug, we're moving in a positive direction. And John and Tanya and I are just, you know, trying to amplify the situation as much as possible. Thank you.
We have life cycle management for products, and so
Yes.
why not life cycle management for people? It seems very, it seems very logical.
It makes sense, Doug, and it makes sense that if you're helping an employee early in their career to think about retirement planning, that you would bring up the topic of, have you talked with your parents yet? Do you guys have a plan? That's a really good point of entry for starting this conversation at an earlier age.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, so I guess it's good that they've started to think about it and talk about it. That's, you know, the first step of change, right? So, John, I'm wondering, what can companies do? You know, what's the next step after they've talked about it and addressed it, or realized there's an issue here, and maybe I'd say an opportunity? You know, what should they and can they do?
Well, Doug, first I'd want to say that anyone who's watching this webinar, we have a PowerPoint presentation that has a lot more stats and statistics and graphics and all sorts of things. So hopefully that will fill it in. And I wanted to just sort of reiterate what Debbie pointed out, which is, if you think that your company is staffed with a ton of young people and this isn't your problem, you're completely wrong. And you'll see if you download the chart that it's millennials, Gen X, Gen Z. It's every age group working in a company. There is a significant number of working caregivers. So we saw that as an opportunity for us to do something a little bit different. So yeah, there are programs out there currently, you know, that employers can hire to help them with, you know, finding a care advocate or those kinds of things, you know, at the back end. But we're more in the learning, development, and training phase. We believe that if we give managers and caregivers the information that they need early on, they won't have to go to the EAP portfolio of offerings, which are fabulous, and we'll be able to manage and navigate through that. Because if they're going into the EAP, you know, portal or going on a website, some of them are website based, they're already in a panic. The ship has sailed. They're in a panic. They're cherry picking a solution, and they're really, you know, probably throwing a Band-Aid on the problem. So that's the first thing. Our program really does work differently. It's an immersive experience. For managers, it's either a half day or full day program where they're committed to not only learning about the marketplace and DEI and all those kinds of things as it relates to caregivers, and how to have those difficult talks with people, and how to recognize a caregiver in the organization. That's what we do. We're in the training and development thing, and we believe that really an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you're going in and if you have the knowledge and the tools before a crisis hits, you're going to be not only much better off, but it's going to be a very expensive and lengthy fix up afterwards if you're in crisis mode. So that's what really is one of our prime differences. We have these live events, and for employees, it's a 2-day experience where we give them the smarts and the courage and the inspiration to feel revived. It's a timeout. They're not in crisis mode, and their ability to engage and absorb is much stronger. So we give them managers specifically, the skills to identify and communicate and support their teams. Other programs, basically, I have to be honest, are just getting around to what we're sort of doing. But they're basically, managers are trained, yes, there is a program in our EAP system. You should go take a look at this. And that's if the employee raises their hand. A lot of employees don't raise their hand. They are afraid of being passed over, fired, not getting a promotion, not being part of an important team that they really want to be part of, even though they're struggling with this life-work balance. So that's really important. So really our business model is to give caregivers and managers the knowledge they need, instead of being having to navigate, like almost all the other programs do, to one of their care advocates, care concierges, care guides. And I'm not taking those lightly. They're really important, but it's also expensive. So if you can navigate better, the company is not going to be spending $300, $400 per employee per month for a care navigator. So they can put resources into things like DEI programs. That's really important. The second thing is that all of us come from a caregiving background and a gerontological experience. We have learning modules from some of the best speakers around that have specific knowledge on each category. So if it's DEI, or how to have conversations, or how to relax, how to take a breath, how to find another Doug to take care when you can't and you're really busy, that's really important. So we think that if companies invest in this, it's really interesting for them to do, and rewarding as well. So yesterday, August 5th, for those who are going to watch this later, an article in Employee Benefit News by Alicia Pace said the top reasons for employers are quitting at record rates one of them is caregiving. Scott Shute of LinkedIn said it's of great interest to an employer, I'm quoting, to do the things that help employees be their best. That's what we do. We're in the learning and development business. So we're showing them how to integrate a full-time job with caregiving, which is extremely hard, but there's some first steps companies and managers can do to start to make things much better. So I just want to share 3 quick slides, and I apologize for the slight delay, but at least you're not hearing my dogs bark, which is always a plus. So, here's what companies can do. One is they could communicate. Managers have to communicate with their teams. It's really important to understand that they have to do it, but we show them not only that they have to do it, but how to do it. The second thing is they can review what's currently in their benefits portfolio, what's working, what's not working. And I think either Debbie or Tanya said earlier, there's a lot of surveys out there. Go out and survey your employees and find out what they think of the program, because we've already seen a lot of disconnects between manager, employee, and if it's a manager, it's probably company-wide an employee. So reviewing the plans, seeing what's right, seeing what's underused, overused, that's really important. And the last thing is care, compassion, and training. You work with them to achieve a better integration between life, work, and caring. And we don't call it life-work balance, Doug. You'll hear that a lot on in every media. We don't think that balance is a legitimate promise. They're integrating the caregiving into their lives and into how they run their business. And that's really important. So back to you.
Just a quick question,
Sure.
because I know Debbie has some information. You and I think maybe all of you have mentioned about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And maybe it's a dumb question, but how does that initiative tie into this? Is it really just an issue of listening to your employees and addressing their personal needs? I mean, how does that go together with what we're talking about today?
I think the word diversity really does cover it in almost a description. It's a great question. I think that it's still, even if an employee, if they're listening to their employees, it does truly benefit them to have an understanding of, by race, gender, age, all those different areas where, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion occur, that there are some critical differences between how, and this is just an example, how a Latin family takes care of an aging senior than my family. And then there's a difference on how an African-American family does it. So there's a difference between cultures and great ones and Asians. Also Debbie could talk about that. So that's one of the things. Equity is really it can be fixed if they understand the equity part of it and they're reviewing their portfolio and balancing things out and saving some money at certain junctures in their complete portfolio. There's room for newer programs, better programs, and a lot of companies are doing this to put in for equity and inclusion. So it does, I think it breaks down that way, Doug.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I appreciate it.
And
Debbie,
may I just add one thing in
Sure.
to piggyback on what John said? So we also have we were requested to put in special components that address the different cultures of caregiving, because
Okay.
it is different. So when employees go through our training, there's a certain amount of training that is common to everyone, and then there are breakout sessions. So, for example, as a manager, you really want that sensitivity about the different cultures of caregiving, and how does that play out in the caregiving situation?
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember the terminology, 10 years ago or whatever. And for some reason, it seems like lately we've had a lot more consultants joining Global Chamber that are DEI and a variety of different addresses. It seems like there's something changing. When, as a German originally, now American, the equity, when I think of equity and the way my parents and maybe older generations would think of it as an employer would be, okay, well, we're going to treat everybody the same, equal, so no special treatment for you people that have those special needs. And so I'm still trying to get my brain around what that really means, because it seems like that historically has been part of the problem.
Yeah, and I just want to throw in two things. One is, someone actually wrote in and reminded me, there's this, and it is in our PowerPoint presentation, about the sandwich generation. Boomers, Gen X, are having children at an older age. And now they're caught between parenting on one side, which is a huge caregiving responsibility, and there's tons of programs actually out in the space to support that. And then there's taking care of the seniors. So they're caught in between. They're double caregiving, and the anxiety and stress that they feel is absolutely going to affect their performance. So that's really what's going on in the marketplace.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Debbie, I clearly and get a sense from all of you that COVID is creating a worse situation in many ways, more challenges certainly. Also, I would think on the flip side, it's also opening up some opportunities, because whoever would have thought of work from home in most of the world. I think about Japan when I've mentioned this, I think, in one of our meetings where Mr. Saito within our company, when I joined a joint venture there, had gone 40 years plus minus, never taken a sick day, every day coming into work. And that was something very prideful. And that kind of mentality is really very old school, right? And really COVID is opening up the possibility where you can be home more and be a caregiver more, certainly the opportunity to do that.
Yes, Doug, and it's really important. I love that example of Japan, because even Japan has changed in this prolonged pandemic, and I think it's important for us all to remember that this thing has been going on for a year and a half or so. I mean, science tells us that it only takes 3 weeks to start really changing behaviors. Imagine what a year and a half of this has done to our collective psyche. And what we're seeing is that, companies with distributed and remote workforces, they were already doing that before, but now, of course, it's everyone has to do that. And there's a very high concern, of course, with individual employee well-being at the same time. So companies are really, really grappling with the way they're going to do work in the future. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the advent of the full-time employee may be on the way down as well. We just don't know how all of this is going to play out. It's also causing dramatic shifts in the way individuals look at their lives and their futures. As John mentioned, we're looking at so-called Great Resignation in September. And, it is becoming a distinguishing feature, a differentiating factor for companies to offer good programs that support their employees. Employees are choosing companies based on that. And millennials are some of the most vocal that we're hearing about, which is fabulous. Thank you. Thank you, millennials, for being very, very vocal. So I think that, it's just creating a situation where companies were already pressured and they're having to look at things in a new and different way. One of the things that I love about our program is that it's a holistic program. So we really want to encourage companies not to cherry pick programs and just put Band-Aids on things, as John said, but to look at their whole culture in their own company and find solutions that match up with that culture. There's really no one size fits all in this situation, because companies can be so different. And we have some interesting components that go very, very deep into things that really contribute to better coping and healing skills. And one of those components is our storytelling offer. And I'm going to turn it over to Tanya, because she is our Chief Storytelling Officer, and she's developed some excellent tools to help caregivers to dig deeper and develop their resilience and coping skills. Tanya?
Yes, thank you, Debbie. So yes, we have created a program called the Storytelling Retreat, which is trademarked as well. And I mentioned earlier about, having grown up in a family where stories are very valued. And I think when I finished the gerontology degree, I appreciated the value of narrative gerontology. And I have kind of developed that further, because over the pandemic, I've seen how valuable storytelling can be actually as part of the caregiving puzzle. And I think I talked earlier about the power of storytelling to be educative, immersive, as well as restorative emotionally. And it's undeniable that this COVID pandemic has been traumatic for everybody. There's a real sense of uncertainty floating around. We don't know when it's going to end. But if we use storytelling to arm our caregiving employees with the tools and support and encouragement that they need, we're going to be better for it, or businesses are going to be better for it, not just from a business standpoint, but from a societal standpoint. And I think that it's really important to think about the fact that in order to heal ourselves and our world, we usually need to look inward. We need to search for the wholeness among all the fractured parts, and there are lots of those right now. And the story that a person embraces can define how they interact with the world. Through stories, we connect with each other, we create community, we engage, and we care. And our storytelling retreat training is an emotive rich program for working caregivers, for managers. It can even be for their care recipients. And I think one of the important things it does is destigmatize mental and emotional health and caregiving issues in the workplace. Because to be honest, you know, when you're caregiving a working mom, that's kind of acceptable. But I think still caregiving for older adults is that dirty little secret. You know, we don't really want to know why Tanya's leaving at 2 p.m. to take her mom to a doctor's appointment. That just doesn't go. It's still like a tabooish thing, which needs to kind of vanish. The storytelling retreat training also fosters social inclusiveness. We've talked about DEI, but it really does. And it's across racial, religious, gender lines. It's just like we're all in this together. We're all dealing with a caregiving thing. It fosters camaraderie and greater quality of life. And by instituting this type of initiative, employees can suddenly discover that they're not so alone in the workplace, because many others, they may not know that, you know, Joe in marketing is also navigating this complicated world of caregiving. So, you know, I think that is definitely something that we all need to look at as well. It's about healing. It's about connecting and healing. It's kind of, it all happens, you know, simultaneously pretty much, but it is a necessary thing. And again, drawing on my background as a qualitative researcher, conducting focus groups and one-on-one interviews, you know, combined with the gerontology training, it's really something that I have tremendous passion for, and that we really feel can assist the corporations help their working caregivers and their managers. Doug?
Sorry about that. I was asking over the din of something we do here in Arizona, which is blow stuff around, and the blowers are outside. So I put myself on mute. I apologize. How does this storytelling module take place in this changing world that we're living in right now?
That's such a great question, Doug. Well, unfortunately, it's a constantly changing COVID reality. You know, 1 week it's this and 1 week it's the other, but these sessions are going to have to occur virtually for the moment. Clearly, the hope is that in the future, you know, they'll be in person again and kind of full of, you know, good karma and everything. But I do think it's possible to do it virtually in a very effective way. You know, I think I tend to be engaging and empathic, and people have a lot of fun. And so companies can sign up for one-time events or for more frequent ones. You know, it can be monthly, quarterly, and that can be part of corporate caregiver camp, or it can also be a separate employee benefit. They're very immersive, these sessions. They're a blend of discussion as well as hands-on creative activities. And each participant is sent the same materials to use to access their deepest thoughts and emotions ahead of time. So they get like a little goodie bag to work with ahead of time, and then, you know, they can open it up virtually when we all get together and start the initiative, the training. So it's kind of exciting, cute, kind of puts a little kick into everybody's day, I think.
That sounds good. It looks like we're going to go a few minutes over, and hopefully everybody can hang on with that. Coincidentally, you mentioned about storytelling and how it's incorporated here. Next week, we have, I think, the 6th session of 8 that we're doing with Global Chamber members that have written books, and we have 3 authors per week. And next week's is about using storytelling in their books. So I think we understand the value of storytelling, and it's really interesting and creative how you've incorporated that here.
Yeah.
John, I think I understand that there are probably some easy wins we should understand and be aware of as these are implemented within a workforce.
Yeah, there really are. And I sort of covered them earlier. It's the 1, 2, 3 of, the identification, the communication, and the training, the education. There's a lot of Asians in there. So those 3 things are the easiest things a company can do. I mean, all companies are learning to develop strong employees and great managers and leaders. Learning how to have the conversations around caregiving is probably step 1. I mean, that really is. The second part is doing those conversations, having them with the employees, listening. There's a lot of diversity out there. You can't do all the programs individually, but that's why we sit with companies in advance, both leaders, managers, and employees, to really tailor the program with specific things that fit that company at this time. And if things change, we'll change and come back and retrain and educate. So that's really the 3 easiest things they can do.
Okay, well, that seems very doable. Debbie, I wonder if you can expand on that and maybe talk to some best practices that we should keep in mind.
Sure, Doug, thanks. One of the, I'd like to add a 4th one, John.
Sure.
I'd like to add celebrate caregiving culture in your company. In fact, the leaders from the top need to take a leadership role in saying, this is important to us. You are important to us. And doing these things don't have to cost an arm and a leg. These are really easy things. And it starts with leaders saying that flows to managers. It's the leaders saying that's important to you and us as a company. And we want you as managers to embrace this. As much as DEI principles, absolutely, it's part of our corporate culture. And you can do that really easily, not only by stating it and setting it out in mission statements and such, but you can also use stories in your employee intranet or publications about your caregiving employees. So you could actually help educate your own workforce and workforce environment about what some of your coworkers are dealing with in their spare time. And if I were doing this, I would show young caregivers, older caregivers. I would have a really diverse picture of what the caregiving universe is in the company. It will naturally be diverse because caregiving does not care how old you are, what color you are. It's just coming, right? It is coming. So, I think companies could be celebrating that a lot more in the way they talk about and recognize caregiving employees. And also, Tanya mentioned employee resource groups. Those are a slam dunk, easy thing to do. You set up employee-led groups that focus on different topics. We've already seen companies putting together DEI, ERG. There's a lot of acronyms flowing around, LGBTQ. We've seen caregiver ERGs for parents of young children and caregiver ERGs for elder caregivers. So there's lots of easy things to do with that. 2 other things that I really like: emergency backup care. Most of these caregiving situations happen in an emergency. So you run along, everything's going fairly well, and then someone falls or has a heart attack or a cancer diagnosis or an Alzheimer's diagnosis, and it throws everyone into a tizzy. So emergency backup care provided by the company is a really good benefit. And another one that I really love, and I have a list of 15, I'm only going to give you one more, Time Bank that allows non-caregiving employees to donate their extra hours to caregiving employees, so that if you run out of your Family Medical Leave Act, your paid leave, you could dip into that time bank that other employees have contributed to. Thank you, Doug.
Great ideas. Thank you. And so as kind of next steps, what would you suggest that members do because of the next steps, maybe things they can do right now in their organizations?
Well, I think the big thing that I always like to say, Doug, is just to open your eyes. You know, look at this problem. Look at what's happening out there. It is real. It is happening to 30% or more of your workforce, even if they're not standing up and saying, "Oh, please help me. I'm a caregiver." Please open your eyes and expand your own awareness. I think as a leader, that's a really important thing that all of us can do, and initiate discussions with other leaders, managers, and your HR team, especially. HR professionals are really under a lot of pressure these days to re-engineer the way that they do things and the way that they are proposing things inside companies. I think their roles are becoming much more important. We're seeing more HR folks with access to boards. We're seeing the boards getting much more involved in the nuts and bolts of how things are being re-engineered. So I think just, you know, being aware, expanding your awareness, having conversations is really good. And I would even go so far as to say, take a leadership role once you get your ducks in a row, and it won't take you long. Take a leadership role with your suppliers and your customers of your company, and maybe even offer them some help, like, "Hey, we did this and it was pretty easy. Can we lend you a helping hand to help you expand your caregiving culture in your company?" And we've even had clients ask us, Doug, they've even come to us for programs that they then gift to a partner or another client of theirs. The one in particular that I'm thinking of was a disadvantaged DEI type community need, and this company literally gifted this program to another company. So there's all kinds of ways, once you open your eyes, that you can help expand this dialogue and improve this challenge in the world. The fixes are not expensive and they're not difficult. They need to be coming from the heart and compassion, as we talked about earlier. Thank you for your great intro on that, Doug. And I would also like to just say, as a marketing person, you know, this and a researcher who's tracked this for over 10 years, the need in this space is not new. I can show you statistics 20, 30 years ago, and I'm working on a presentation about that. But, you know, I don't want to look retrospectively at, you know, wow, we've known about this for 20 years. Why haven't we done anything about it? I don't want to look at it that way. What I would like to do is say, you know what? COVID has given us a fabulous opportunity to look at this. It has shown us the way forward. So let's use that chance to make an impact. And companies who do these things, because the bar is very low, companies that do these things will be super well rewarded, not only by shareholders and other stakeholders, but especially by their employees and their whole policies for retention and recruiting. You know, I could talk about this for hours, Doug, and I have with you many times. So, you know, I would also like to say, please schedule a free consultation with John, Tanya, and I, and, you know, we'll talk about your situation and help you find some cost-effective ways of going forward.
And if I just may add, if I just may add something, Doug, it's Tanya.
Sure.
I think that one of the things that we learned in COVID, we learned a lot of things, but one of the interesting statistics emerging was that older adults have actually shown greater resilience, maybe because they were depression babies and they just learned to manage and cobble together solutions. And I think that one of the important things about ensuring that there are healthy, caring manager and working employee programs in place is that it actually benefits everyone, the individual working caregivers, the corporation, and society, because we are teaching everybody how to build greater resilience. And in order to withstand the rampaging COVID and anything else that's coming down the pike, that's what we're going to need. We can, take care of it. We can influence thoughts, behaviors, and the ability to move ahead even in these challenging times.
Great ad. Thank you, Tanya. We are a little bit over, but I do want to do a couple things before we finish up. I have one question that seems really important, and then I'd like to ask each of you to kind of do a wrap up, and certainly within the wrap ups, let us know how to contact you. Debbie, you mentioned about scheduling something. Let us know before we finish up today. The question relates, and maybe John, you're the best to answer this, is how do the caregiving options and solutions differ from small, medium, and large companies? You've got multinationals with big budgets and HR service offerings that where they've invested in, and hopefully will do more investment in this area. And then you've got medium and small companies, even startups. How would you contrast both the needs and some of the solutions depending on company size?
Sure. So first I'll say the common thing. The common thing is building empathy. If you build empathy, you build resilience. You build empathy and resilience. That's how you retain your employees and have a happier workforce, and you become a great place to work. So that doesn't matter whether you're a large, small, international corporation. When you're dealing with a small company, it's usually they're newer, and so the company culture can be built faster and better than there's trying to turn around a battleship. So is a common phrase. So if we thought of them in that way, one is a speedboat. It's easier to turn around and really get all the employees engaged and on board with the program as you move forward into other companies and diverse workforces and globalization. Then you also have to take in the cultural differences of each of those markets. You mentioned your German heritage. I've also done a lot of work in Germany and all over Europe and Asia as well. And if you don't take it into account how the global businesses work, your program's not going to work. So I think that's the biggest differences between sizes of companies.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that. This is John Brody. He's the co-founder of Corporate Caregiver Camps. John, I'm wondering if you could maybe just do either a summary or a wrap up, or what should we kind of be left with given
Sure.
What we talked about today.
Well, the first thing is we hope and everyone who's watching is treating their caregiving employees with more empathy after seeing this program. Also, I'd like the biggest differentiation between us and other programs is we come before the EAP portfolio. We're more about building the resiliency within the company, understanding of the workforce, and that you have. So that's one of the key differences. We're in the learning and development phase of a business, and that's our key differentiation. And anyone can reach out to me at John, Jon, no H, at caregivercamps.com, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have.
I appreciate that. Thank you, John. Tanya Krim is co-founder and chief storyteller of Corporate Caregiver Camp, happens to be in the UK today, so another global citizen. Tanya, what would you like to say in wrap up, and how can people get a hold of you as well?
Okay, well, I am all of that. I am the passionate storyteller, so I will say that I think storytelling is the way to go. Story, oxytocin, and empathy have been linked. The more we hear stories about other people's situations, the more we tell our stories, the more our brains are bathed in oxytocin, and we become more empathic, social, and better creatures, and that's going to help our corporations and our world. So I would say that stories are about influencing thoughts, behaviors, feelings, the ability, as I said, to move ahead, even in very difficult times. And the social scripts we foster and share with others can reinforce our belief that what we think and do really matters, and it propels us forward. So I think that It is a very valuable tool in our toolbox for coping on both individual and corporate level. I can actually be reached. I do have a caregiver camp thing, but because of my gerontologist background, I'm still sticking with my Tanya at thevitalpeople.com, which was one of my original emails that John and I created together. So I'm there as well, but you can just find me on LinkedIn as well if you want to speak to me or hear from me. Thank you for your time, Doug, today.
Our pleasure. As you mentioned that, I think of the story of poor Mr. Saito, who for 40 years, did not take a single sick day. And so there's a story that could go either way, because 40 years ago, that was something admirable, right? It's like, wow, that's impressive. You're an amazing guy. And it could have probably been many times stories like that have been told to inspire people to do really stupid things like what he had done. And yet now we're smarter, right? So we have the ability to recognize that the next layer of questions that we might ask him is that he probably went through hell, and he probably subjected other people to his sicknesses and illnesses over the years. And, what about caregiving, and what are some of the kind of the next levels that we never really asked about, right? 40 years ago, or even maybe 20 years ago in Japan. So Debbie, wonder, so it's interesting that a story can be told and you can come to different conclusions. And I'm very happy to see that you all three are coming to the right conclusions, and companies are thinking about it more and more in the same way. So thank you, Tanya. Really appreciate it. Debbie, would you like to wrap up and let us know? Of course, we know how to get a hold of you, but what would you like to say in conclusion? We really, again, appreciate you bringing this dynamic trio of experts and today to Global Chamber.
Thanks very much, Doug. It is a big challenge in our world, but I don't think that John and Tanya and I have bit off more than we can chew. I think we're going for it. I would just like to leave the idea with everyone that this is going to happen to you and to your employees. The statistics show that if you're aged between 40 and 50, half of those people will have a caregiving experience in the next 5 years. So it's happening whether you want it or not. Open your eyes. Think about a caregiving culture in your company, whether you're helping caregivers of young children or caregivers of their parents and aging loved ones. And honestly, caring for each other as team members. I think having a caregiving culture in a company is a very good thing, and it's something that is growing in popularity in terms of making a good employee experience. I think most people at Global Chamber know how to get me through multiple channels, but you can also find me at debbie@caregivercamps.com. And I would also like to say, if any of you Global Chamber members have stories you would like to share about how your company has helped and set up systems, even if they're really simple, to support your working caregivers, we would love to interview you on our Caregiver Camp podcast. So keep that in mind. It's a great way to get some publicity for the good work that you're doing. That's pretty much all we have to say today. Thank you so much for listening.
Really appreciate that. Thanks all three of you for your leadership. When I think about that word equity, and it leads to ultimately fairness and caring and decency, and some of the aspects of society sometimes that historically haven't really been addressed in the workplace. But here we have opportunities to have knowledge about the impact of these things on people. And when you have a situation now with the big resignation where it seems like there's a power shift that's happening, where employees have a little bit more power, it seems like companies are going to be more receptive, probably are already to some extent more receptive to ways of retaining, especially given the data that John talked about. The expense of losing employees is significant. And so why not care? It's not just a good thing to do, but it's good business. So thank all of you for sharing, and again for your leadership, and thanks everybody who attended. One of the things that also I think about are some of the consultants I alluded to earlier that do DEI work. We definitely need to connect you to them so that they're aware of what you're doing and undoubtedly synergize with these important programs. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, John. Thank you, Tanya. And have a great rest of your day and have a good weekend.
You too, Doug.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, everybody.